Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another round of the Season 10 Championship of the PlayStation 5 GT3 League on Assetto Corsa Competizione. And we are here tonight at Misano for a night race. So, slightly different look this evening. It is another 1 hour race with the mandatory tyre change, so same rules as it has been for all the 1 hour races this season. We do have the outside chance of some weather changeability in this race, although the prediction is strongly towards dry, with the challenge of the dark conditions being what we expect the drivers to have to deal with mostly, but there could also be some rain thrown in there and that would mix things up even more so. Looks like 17 drivers only for this one tonight at the moment. Slightly disappointing, obviously numbers dropping slightly through the season. We've tended to have sort of low 20s for most races, but slightly smaller grid here tonight, and we will get underway for qualifying relatively shortly. Practice times, as always, visible. Not always worth reading too much into them, as we have seen previously. I have made calls based on the practice times that turn out to be not too representative of what happens next. Jazzman certainly looking quick, as always. And we'll see how the rest play out from there. This is the penultimate round of the season now. The championship battle still looking fairly comfortable for Tinus, with quite a strong lead in the championship. He has been on the podium every single race this season and has the advantage over Jazzman, primarily due to a disconnect. But unfortunately that's the way it goes, so we don't have a big championship battle on our hands unless Tinus has some issues in either of the last two races. But we have Bleeding Sunrise first out on track for qualifying today in the Porsche. He's in a bit of a championship battle of his own with Scott Fell for third. The gap at the moment is 44 points, so some work to do for Bleeding Sunrise to catch that up, but very much still possible. First laps in this session probably not going to be very representative, obviously with the cooler temperatures with the nighttime session. The tyres will take a little bit longer to get up to temperature, so you would imagine second and third laps will be where the times really start to tumble. We saw a 33 flat from Jazzman in free practice. Can they put it into the 32s in qualifying? Bleeding Sunrise will be the first time on the board, but for now we come round to begin our laps. Let's jump on board. Just looking a little bit uncertain going into turn one there, lots of counter steering. The Porsche obviously a very tricky car at times. Can be very quick with the right setup, but always difficult to keep the back end under control, especially on the lighter fuel loads. worth mentioning that the curbs are very important around this lap. They are very flat curbs and the track limits are quite lenient. As long as you are still on the curbs rather than off with all four wheels beyond the curb, it tends to be a valid lap, as Bleeding Sunrise makes it successfully through the fast right-hander at the end of the back straight. So yeah, using all of the track is crucial to good pace, especially for qualifying round here. What will Bleeding Sunrise put on the board for the opening lap? We've got Tinnis invalidated on his first lap behind. Bleeding Sunrise with a 35.3. Jazzman will be coming through as well, and straight away a 33.0. So impressive pace from the off. Further back we've got Yip, who has found himself a lot of clean air, leaving the pits a little bit later. Currently have a top 5 of Ferraris, but I think that's more to do with who set the times than anything else. Only 6 times on the board. Maybe the Ferrari a bit easier to be consistent with, as that's a wide moment for Yip, and I think that would be invalidated on that particular lap. Indeed, no time set, so he will have another effort at that banker. Crest as well, just coming round. He has put himself up into 3rd position and will begin his next effort. So I was about to say battle for the best of the rest was with PS Vids, but Tinnis has now put himself into 2nd place and straight back to the pits, ready for another run. Starting to look very close in that middle pack. Say middle pack, it's really everyone other than Jazzman at the moment. But Guido Christ right in the middle of that group on another lap. Looks clean enough. Will it be an improvement in time to jump him up from what is currently 6th position? Nice and careful through the last corner, and it is another couple of tenths and up to P4. He will continue on. As Jazzman has made his way into the 32s, we'll jump on board with him now just to see where that time is coming from. All looking very smooth and under control through the first sector. Very comfortable, no struggles with the car, no counter steering to make up for any moments. It is just all looking very, very under control. On the edge of the track limits there, but still within. A little bit wide over the final corner, comes across the line, and that's another 3.5 tenths improvement. So Jazzman with a 1 second gap to the next car, quite incredible really at the moment. As Mr. Moosington now puts his Ferrari into P2. So the battle for P2 very much on. We've got just 7 tenths from second all the way down to 12th. We still have a few drivers yet to set any lap times. We've got a late joining Shaka Zulu. Overall, smooth, clean looking lap from Joe Powell. Does he improve? No, but he's carrying on, so it looks like he may have either already made that mid-session swap to fresh tyres, or he is doing the entire session on a single run. We have McQuiz yet to set a lap time. Other than Shaka Zulu, those are the only two without a time. Shaka Zulu has joined late, and I believe this wouldn't be the first time he has joined at this time and decided to not set a time in qualifying. As we have Pren disqualified from the session for driving in the wrong direction. That is probably the result of a spin in the final sector. I didn't spot it at the time, but can happen here. Very unfortunate. Unfortunately, not a lot we can do about that. But what can McQuiz do here? Is this a valid lap? Very important now with just 4 minutes remaining to get a time on the board. And he does, and that puts him to 15th only for the time being. Meanwhile, we've also had Guido Christ put in a very solid lap time up into third, and the quickest Porsche, which has most often gone to either Scott or Bleeding Sunrise this season. So Guido Christ with some bragging rights there, if he can hold on to that. Tinnis, championship leader, down in fourth, will be looking to improve for sure. Let's see if we can find where Tinnis is. He is on the back straight. He will have this lap and 2 more, if he has the fuel, of course. But there is just a couple of hundredths in it, all the way from second to fifth, so small improvements can make a big difference to the grid order here. Tinnis pushing hard through the last sector on the limit and makes a big jump up, and that is P2 potentially secured there with a time just half a second off Jazzman. the end of the session. One lap left for the majority of these drivers. We've got Rick MotoGP looking like he might be on the perfect place in track just to get 2 more laps in. Other than that, this will be final laps for everyone. So final laps starting for everyone when they next cross the line, that is. Several drivers already back in the pits as well, so Slicker has finished, as has Yip, PS Vids, and we've got Pren obviously with that disqualification, unfortunately, as it was a time good enough for 10th. And Shaka Zulu, who will not be qualifying but starting from the back of the field. But Rick coming across the line for what may be the last time as he backs off, so that will be the end of his session. It will be Jazzman next across the line. Nope, that's a practice pit stop for Jazzman. Feels like he's got enough on the table. Leading Sunrise currently down in 14th. He'll be wanting more from his last lap. We've got Mr. Moosington on his final run, currently up in 3rd. It would be a big effort to find another 4 tenths or so to improve to the front row, but he is giving it everything here. And right out onto the curb at the final corner. Can he improve? No, P3, but he'll be very happy with that. Next up, Matthew, currently just sat on the edge of the top 10, improves the time, but still P10. And we've got McQuiz coming across the line. He is 13th, stays 13th with an improvement in time though. And then the last few cars to come across the line. CZ Adam, again, improvement in time, but no position, so plenty of time gain. Joe Powell makes a position on the line at up to P8, and that is the end of the qualifying session. So quite an advantage for Jazzman at the top. If that translates into race pace, it may be very difficult for anyone to challenge for the win tonight, but that midfield battle, I mean, I call it midfield, it's really the battle for the podium. All incredibly close. And we could see some incredible racing throughout the hour here today if it all remains on that similar pace. First things first, no surprises thrown in the weather forecast so far, all looking nice and dry. A little bit of cloud cover, which won't make any real difference to the temperature, being that this is an 11 o'clock start PM for the race. Very nice to see the contrast of the liveries of the cars with the lighting in the dark. Very different from seeing them all in the daytime. Something a little bit different for this one. And we will keep a close eye on the racing Nonetheless, I'm sure I will miss one or two things where it's slightly harder to see in the background who's who in the dark, but try and keep as best an eye on everything as possible on the timing screens as always, and catch up with the yellow flags usually just after the incident's cleared, so we don't really know exactly what's gone on. But having said that, hopefully we have as incident-free a race as possible. And the other thing around Misano is the track limits. Although a lot of the corners are quite lenient, you do have to push the limits, and to get the time round here you are close at many corners from those warnings, so drive-throughs very much a possibility for track limits for anyone pushing too hard. And it's not a short pit lane to the drive-through. I mean, it costs you a lot in a 1 hour sprint regardless, but round here very much going to put you out of contention. So just 30 seconds on the counter for the session start, and final adjustments to fuel load and any strategy for the pit stops.
20 seconds.
Obviously it should be a fairly basic one here today. Again, you would imagine that the half and half fuel with a fresh set of tyres halfway through will be the optimum, but again there might be one or two looking to push for that undercut, or even go long, trying to maybe make a bit of time in some clear air. Away we go on the formation lap. Strong qualifyings for Mr. Moosington and Guido Christ. That may be qualifying highs for both those drivers this season. Another strong showing for PS Vids. He's had one or two this season. Remember bad luck in Suzuka when he got involved in an incident at 130R when he was running in a strong position for a potential podium there. And leading Sunrise, probably the most notably out of position further down the order. As said, often battling for those positions, sort of 4th, 5th, 6th, and in a close battle for 3rd in the championship. But 14th on the grid here, not helping his cause, but plenty of opportunities to come back here. And lots of weaving going on, so definitely some thoughts going towards tyre temperature. The cool conditions will make it tricky in the first lap. Hopefully everyone has a sensible head going into turn 1. No ambitious moves. We don't want to see 4 or 5 cars out of contention straight away. It's a tricky first sequence of corners at Misano. I feel like I say that every week. There's probably not many races where it is just smooth sailing through the first couple of corners, but let's hope today everyone can make it through. But the cars all there lining up into double file. Pren at the back, another one out of position from that unfortunate disqualification from qualifying. So we'll keep an eye on his progress back through as well. But first things first, who gets the launch off the line as we approach the start finish? And the green light, we are away. Jazzman on the inside, Tennis with a strong launch is fully alongside, but Jazzman seems to have the line there. Everyone else behind cleanly through so far from what I can see. As we have the battle for P4 between Guido Christ and Mr. Moosington. Mr. Moosington still in fourth for now, and at this point in the race we have had no collisions, so a strong opening sequence at the moment. Slicker currently bringing up the rear of the field, but everyone through without major damage. Already a couple of positions made up for Pren as he's made his way past Shaka Zulu as well. Jazzman already taking a reasonable lead out front. Shaka Zulu has a look round the outside, but goes deep and off track. Meanwhile, we have had PS Vids make his way past Guido Christ for P4. Somewhere around the back straight in the third sector in that lap, I think. Didn't see that one change earlier on, so PS Vids will now look at Mr. Moosington in front and see what the relative pace is compared to the other Ferrari. But the top two already starting to make a move out front. All incredibly close throughout the rest of the field. A big wide moment there for Pren. Another place where you do have to be very careful on the track limits. Not Pren, sorry, PS Vids. I think he would have got away with that one because he shouldn't have gained time there. But Guido Christ looking to see if he can come back at PS Vids after that lap 1 move. Just a little bit wide on the apex there for Guido Christ. Those hairpins, not really much advantage in taking too late of an apex. Pressure just off PS Vids a little bit again. Very hard to know what to look at in this mid-pack, but let's jump on board with Bleeding Sunrise. No gain off the start, so maybe took it a little bit cautious, just wanting to make sure he survived, but we'll be looking to make up some positions from here, unless he's just struggling with the setup of that Porsche and isn't actually really feeling that much quicker than those around him. So far, Bleeding Sunrise not looking like he's got anything particularly extra in hand over McQuiz here. Just trying to keep it on track, keep it as close as possible, but the pressure not piling onto McQuiz for now. So it may well be that the call that Bleeding Sunrise is slightly out of position in this one. Maybe a bit too early, that call. It could just be this is where his pace is around this track today. So we did have a very small gap between Don Michaelo and CZ Adam through the third sector there, but Don Michaelo has hung on to P9. We did join as he was very wide out of the final corner. Lots of dust being kicked up, but all still facing the right direction. Very different lines going into the right hand hairpin there. We have Don Michaelo leaving it out wide to come back in, and Adam taking the much narrower line. But we do have weather forecast throwing this one up into the air. Light rain in half an hour. That will be unexpected for most of these drivers, I would imagine. The percentage chance of rain was low, and that is going to throw the curveball into this one. How long will that rain last? Could play a massive factor in the result of this one. And for the time being, it is just light rain. Dry tyres could cope with that if it is a short shower, but if that rain carries on to the end of the race, then a stop for wet tyres might be the strategy. Who's got the fuel to get far enough? We will have to wait and see in 25-30 minutes time, but right now we have plenty of battling still going on. Guido Christ in P5, dropping away from PS Vids. Pressure on from Scott Fell and Rick not too far behind either, but it is Scott piling on the pressure first and foremost. Let's watch this from the TV cam as Guido Christ feeling the need to just hint of a defence even down the back straight. There really isn't an overtaking opportunity there unless you are fully alongside. Scott all over the back of him now and just looking to cause a bit of a distraction in the mirrors. And Guido Christ just not quite hitting his apexes, which will keep the pressure on. Scott tucked in right behind, thinks about a move but holds off, and we'll look for another opportunity. Again, just trying to show the nose, but almost losing control of his own car there. Needs to keep it sensible. That could have been a big incident between the two of them, as that steering angle under braking almost threw him there and lost control of the car. Still lots of close battling through the mid-pack. We do have the two leaders really starting to stretch their legs. Jazzman 4 seconds clear early on. Tinnis not able to keep with him, but still dropping Mr. Moosington. And we have just jumped away from this battle just as the action happens. Scott has found a way past, so Guido Christ down to P6, Scott up to P5. Already 5 seconds adrift of PS Vids, but that was Rick MotoGP, I believe, going into the back of Guido Christ through turn 1. Just caught the edge of that as they went to the apex. And that will be time lost for Rick. Don't think anyone else got involved in that. The others did all survive. Maybe a bit of contact on Guido Christ's car, but he is still running in behind Scott. So if there is any damage on the car, it should be minor. Guido Christ not letting Scott Fell get away just yet. So the pace between the two of them quite similar by the look of it, just Guido Christ making a few mistakes before that allowed Scott to get the move on him. We've also got close battling between Yip, Matthew and Rick now. And further back, Leading Sunrise still sat in behind the quiz, but quite close on his tail. Yep, just fallen back a little bit again. It does look like the sort of comfortable following gap around this track might be just over half a second. Difficult to stay close throughout the entire lap. To the car in front. There are some sections where there is some sort of big commitment on the brakes needed, and with that car in front it's just not quite so easy. Just ebbing and flowing a little bit here. Rick, after that spin at turn 1, has managed to pull away from Matthew again slightly. We've still got Leading Sunrise and the quiz together, and Adam on the back of Don Michelo, with Joe Powell not too far in front either, and that is a slight misjudgment from Don Michelo as to what Joe Powell was doing, and that has given Adam a good run out onto the back straight. But the pace of that Lamborghini in a straight line doing plenty to keep Adam well and truly behind. As we see more examples of some well, risky track limits usage there is the most I can say. I would imagine that would be a warning for Don Michelo. Obviously 4 of those warnings does equate to a drive-through penalty. Both Don Michelo and Adam on the limit of grip with those cars pushing everything they've got here. Do wonder if Adam's a little bit closer into that hairpin, whether that is somewhere he'll look for a move with the different line the two of them take into that corner. Adam with the tighter line might just be able to put the car down the inside and get in the way of Don Michelo taking that late apex and force him onto a wider line. Another wiggle from the back end of the Lamborghini there, so definitely feeling the pressure. Don Michelo trying to look for every little bit of lap time he can find to keep that Ferrari behind him. Gap between P5 and P6 still half a second, so having made the move, Scott Fell unable to close in the gap to P4, and Guido Christ absolutely staying with him, so that could be a battle for the entirety of this first stint. We are almost 20 minutes into this race already, and I wouldn't expect to see any early pit stops until anyone is out of fuel completely. That weather will have taken away any thoughts of the undercut for these drivers. But Don Michelo now right onto the back of Joe Powell as well, so these two battling has not stopped them catching up to P8. And that is a big wide moment for Don Michelo. Let's jump on board with Adam again, because this is potentially the closest he's been, but not the best of exits there, and that will not be close enough for any kind of move. But the mistakes are showing just here or there for Don Michelo. Very tricky to combine attack and defence, and he will need to remain wary of Adam even when he's looking to try and do something to get past Joe Powell in front. Leading Sunrise still tucked in behind McQuiz, the gap varying anywhere from 0.3 to almost a second, closing in massively into the braking there, but hasn't been able to do anything about getting past up to this point. And very wide of the apex there. We've had someone off into the grass in front as well, so plenty of people pushing the track limits looking for that lap time. Also have Pren starting from the back after his disqualification in qualifying, also joining the back of this little battle, so yes, he goes very deep into the hairpin there, so not an ideal time to jump on board with him, but definitely looking like he has the pace, even if that little mistake will just set him back another lap or two to get back onto the back of Bleeding Sunrise and McQuiz. Meanwhile, we also have a potential battle for the podium hotting up. PS Vids has slowly been closing in on Mr. Moosington, so the all-Ferrari battle for P3 and P4 could become quite close on track very soon. Is what it looks like. PS Vids right up to the back of Mr. Moosington now, so that gap slowly come down in the last few laps. And we have Rick into the pits early, so I wasn't expecting anyone in at this point with the weather set to change. So that is an early pit stop, so Rick banking on that rain remaining light and no change to wet tyres. Does appear to be some damage on the back of that car potentially from earlier on. It has worked for Rick earlier in the season, the early pit stop. Brands Hatch, a very good example of that, but you have to say with the weather change here, he's set to lose quite a bit if that rain comes down any heavier. Having said that, we've only got 35 minutes left in this race and it's still showing as light rain in half an hour. Join on board with Don Michaelo once again just after a move, and Joe Powell jumps into the pit lane immediately, so another early pit stop. And once again, is that just not being able to make it to the wet weather on the fuel, or is that a conscious decision to just stick on another set of dry tyres and hope for the best that that rain doesn't become unmanageable. And there is a spin for Don Michelo, just lost the traction out of the slow right-handers. He will now be under big pressure again from Adam, who has been close behind for much the first stint, had just dropped back a bit. Not quite close enough to make the lunge though, so time lost for Don Michelo. Adam will get another chance here as that Lamborghini struggling for grip now. And Don Michelo deep into the corner to defend. Adam with the cutback, and they will go side by side up the back straight, but the Lamborghini with enough acceleration to get clean in front again. And as I've said before, this is not a section of track to be going side by side, but Adam really threatening there. Don Michelo wide off the track, and we have contact. I think we're still both facing forwards, but that was a little bit bold going in, and it was always going to end in side-by-side contact at that point. But we have remained as we were in terms of positions, and both drivers still facing forwards, and I don't think we will have any major damage from that. Leading Sunrise also into the pits now. That rain will be staying with us to the end of the race once it arrives. Just 10 minutes until the first drops should arrive now. Will be interesting to see who's got the fuel to make it that far into the race. If anyone does go for the wet tyres, obviously we don't have anything that tells us who's done what. We will have to base it simply off the pace, off how the cars are driving, but it will be an interesting call for everyone. So this battle at the bottom end of the top 10 has been going on for a while. Matthew Asbrook in P9 now after a couple of pit stops from in front. Yip has been following closely for a lot of this race already, but no position change. So continuing for another lap. Don Michelo with a drive through for track limits in the first half hour of the race. So as I said earlier, the track limits can be quite brutal here if you push them too far, and Don Michelo already become a victim of that. But jumping back to the battle for P3, we are running side by side. PS Vids looked like he'd made his way through there, but Mr. Moosington still holding on. So can PS Vids make another go of it? Mr. Moosington just not quite on the same pace at this stage of the stint. And PS Vids will look for the lunge into the hairpin, but not quite there for that one. And Mr. Moosington dives for the pit lane. I think that caught PS Vids out a little bit there. Wasn't expecting that. PS Vids carries on. Mr. Moosington, the first of our real front runners into the pit lane. And surely anyone pitting now is still on the dry tyres. There's no way you can get the wets to last 5 minutes on a bone-dry track. Would just be absolute suicide on those tyres. Yep, has come in the next lap around as well, so we are seeing plenty of pit stops on the half-hour mark, despite the weather forecast as Mr. Moosington leaves his box. And the battle for net P5 still continuing on track, the two Porsches less than a second apart. Battle between the two Ferraris for P3 temporarily suspended in the pit stop phases. PS Vids will be looking to put in strong lap times now up until he comes in for his tyre change. And where does Yip come out in relation to Joe Powell and Rick MotoGP? Should be around Rick based on where they were before the pit stops. As we have Scott Fell into the pit lane as well. Yip is out a long way behind Rick, so I feel like I've missed something in that pit stop phase. Yip was running on track close to Rick before the pair of them pit, so that is a big time loss for Yip. Maybe there was an incident on his in-lap. And we have J Turbo in as well, so many drivers either deciding to stick it out on the dries or just not having the fuel to make it, as Pren makes a move up the inside of McQuiz. That one is done and dusted. McQuiz tucks in behind. We actually see somehow Joe Powell has managed to undercut and is ahead of Scott Fell, so that is a pit stop that's worked out nicely for him. Guido Christ obviously was right on track with Scott, so if that was a clean pit stop for Scott, that suggests that Joe Powell may be up into a net P5 now. We have the Lamborghinis of Matthew and Tinnis, and also Slicker coming into the pit lane. Has anybody got the fuel to make it to the wet? Will anybody go for the wet tyres? This could massively mix up the order if it does rain enough to cause a problem. And our leader Jazzman in as well. So we'll get an answer shortly as to what happened, or if anything happened to Yip. Obviously he was tucked right in behind Matthew before the pit stops. But it looks to me like the undercut is working quite well. We've got Leading Sunrise now coming out ahead of Matthew. The gap to Yip from Matthew is quite large. I think something did happen for Yip 242 on that in-lap. As we have almost the entire rest of the field into the pit lane. We have McQuiz still out on track, and he will take the race lead momentarily. Jazzman not too far behind. having already almost made up a pit stop. And then it just remains Shaka Zulu and McQuiz out on track. Trying to find any on-track battles here as all the pit stops go through. Looks like everything has spread out a little bit. We have Guido Christ on pit exit. He was very close with Scott Fell as they came into the pit lane. Scott just coming through turn 1 now. And it looks like Guido Christ has got that position back. Joe Powell has gained a lot in the pit stops. As we now have the rain start, so 23 minutes left in this race. Could this be a big moment for McQuiz and Shaka Zulu? Will they put on the wet tyres? Will anyone else have to stop again? McQuiz into the pits this lap. And it would be a bold call for the wet tyres, but the track is getting damp already. Shaka Zulu carries on for another lap. We will quickly see on the onboards for these drivers if it gets tricky in these conditions. But it is a long time to survive this on the dry tyres. Will anybody make a second stop? As it stands though, with the track condition greasy, it does tend to be that the wet and the slick tyres have a fairly even amount of pace. It is usually safer to run on the wet tyres, but the slicks absolutely can go the same pace and, if anything, potentially a little bit quicker still in these conditions. We just have to see if the track does get any worse. Shaka Zulu continues on. He will be hoping that this rain increases sooner rather than later. It looks like he is pushing to the point where he'll put on the wet tyres. Can we tell what McQuiz has gone for? As Rick MotoGP is back into the pit lane, so is that a call for wet tyres? It is a second stop for Rick. Surely that is a box for the wet tyres, and we will then finally be sure what the relative pace is between the two. So Rick, unless McQuiz has gone for the wet tyres, is the first to jump at that opportunity. Track is now damp, so wet tyres will be quicker from here, but is it worth the pit stop? That is the question. Shaka Zulu still yet to make his mandatory stop, potentially could gain a lot out of this. McQuiz as well, if he has chosen the wet tyres, may suddenly rocket up through the order. And Mr. Moosington back into the pits as well. So decisions all round in terms of the strategy. We weren't expecting this one tonight. As we have more drivers diving for the pit lane, McQuiz carries on. I think McQuiz is on the wet tyres already here. So the big gainers from this situation definitely going to be Sharka Zulu and McQuiz. Is anyone going to stick it out on the slicks? We've still got our leaders out there, PS Vids continuing in what is a net P3. As we have had one driver just disconnect from the lobby, not 100% off the top of my head who that was. Sharka Zulu finally into the pit lane, surely for the wet tyres. But pit lane time loss is quite significant, so if drivers can make it home on the slicks without any major issues. The lap times currently 1 minute 44 last lap round from Scott Bell. The dry lap times were 1 minute 33s. We need to see what those on the wet tyres are doing. McQuiz with a 1:42.7, so the pace difference somewhere around 2 seconds between the tyres. If that increases, then those that gambled on the wets might come back through the field a bit, but it's so hard to judge at this point, and I am very glad that I am just watching this and not having to make those calls for myself. And here is a direct potential. Oh no, Mr. Moosington has also boxed, so we have two drivers on the wet tyres here. Sharka Zulu though gaining up to fighting the driver that was in a battle for the podium, having started all the way at the back of the field. So Sharka Zulu has still gained well out of this, but McQuiz is the one who has gained a lot more, up into P7. Was running down in 13th for the majority of the first stint, and could be set to gain more if he can get those wet tyres working. That's very wide for Mr. Moosington, a big lift, trying to avoid the warnings for track limits. So Jazzman doing 1 minute 41.8 on that lap. We've got, who's our lead driver on the wet tyres? I believe it is McQuiz. Yeah. Having said that, McQuiz with a 43.3, so maybe McQuiz went for the slicks. Mr. Moosington absolutely is on the wet tyres. That is a 42.5. Very difficult to judge here. Lap times don't seem to be wildly different between the tyres. So those that have stuck it out on the slicks as opposed to making the second stop at this stage have probably made the right call. Moosington wide once again and having to back off massively to avoid the penalty. But here we can see the difference in grip between the slick and the wet tyres. Mr. Moosington cruising up to the back of J Turbo Deluxe. Mr. Moosington comfortably at the inside. That should be the move done. But the real question remains, is the pace difference enough? Was it worth that extra stop? As we have CZ Adam close behind Joe Powell. Very, very difficult to judge any moves on the dry tyres in these conditions. A little bit of connectivity issues there, also not making things any easier, that is for sure. Adam does make his way past Joe Powell, and next behind the Ferrari is Scott Bell. As far as I'm aware, these drivers are all on the slick tyres. It is just a question of confidence in these conditions. The pace very inconsistent, and very much how much of a risk factor these drivers are willing to take. It can take just one moment on a curb to completely drop the car. As Scott backs off down the back straight, unable to comfortably get alongside. Clearly the more confident of the two currently. And round he goes, round the outside into the penultimate corner. And improves to P5. Tricky to watch from an onboard camera when the wipers aren't on, so we will switch back to trusty TV camera. These two will need to shortly get out of the way for our P2 man Tinus. but they are in a close battle between themselves as Rick comes back to try and make his way past Yip. I think this may be a tyre disparity as well. Yip still on the slicks. Rick, I believe, changed to the wet tyres. I could be wrong with that. I've completely lost track of everyone's strategy. I'm not sure I even knew it in the first place. This has been definitely an exciting race, but very, very difficult to keep a track of in any meaningful way, and I do apologise for that. One thing I will say right now is that I think those that made the second stop will be regretting it. The wet tyres not doing enough compared to the slicks to make up for the second pit stop. Next up behind Yip is Guido Christ, another one of those drivers that did make the second stop. Guido Christ looking far more comfortable here, so we would expect to see a move shortly. And there is Yip wide on the entry. We'll recover some of that on the exit, but the difference in the tyre grip is visible when you've got two cars close on track, but it's not creating a massive delta in terms of lap time. And Yip stays well off the racing line, and that is Guido Christ through. Yip trying to hold it round the outside, but I think that is move done for Guido Christ. Joe Powell definitely struggling here. I do wonder if some of those that pit around the half-hour mark put the wet tyres on straight away and just decided to suffer for a couple of laps. Because there is a big pace difference here. Those like Adam and Scott Fell, who are continuing to pull away from Joe Powell. The quiz here will have put the wet tyres on in his stop and is gaining. We will only find out after the race when we can speak to some of the drivers and find out what the strategies were. For now we are in the blind, but trying to work out where it's all going to fall. We do only have 3 laps of this race remaining. Jazzman just coming across the start-finish line now. Just another mention of those gaps at the front. 13 seconds clear for Jazzman, a further 16 seconds from P2 to P3. PS Vids currently in a comfortable podium position as well. Joe Powell really struggling in that car now. And that will be P6 for McQuiz. Joe Powell down to 7. It does have a reasonable gap behind Mr. Moosington. He will be hoping that he can hang on to that one. Mr. Moosington pushing hard, trying to gain back some of the time he lost having made that second pit stop. Big slide for Mr. Moosington, really pushing hard. He'll know that he's got that opportunity to try and catch Joe Powell in front, and in fact Mr. Moosington is still ahead on track of Jazzman, so is still on the lead lap and will have this and 2 more laps if he can remain in that position ahead of our race leader. And I'm sure with the current difference in pace, Mr. Moosington will be convinced he can gain that extra position back. In fact, Joe Powell visible to him now on the back straight quite clearly, and that gap is just being eaten away at. So Joe Powell sticking with the dry tyres for this entire race. He will be wondering whether that was the right call at this stage. Having said that, he did make up positions early with the undercut. And there is the gap going across the line, so Mr. Moosington closing in very rapidly now, just 2.3 seconds, and he will probably even get it done on this lap.
Right, man, the leader is on the final lap. Give me the final push.
Difference in traction, absolutely huge. Mr. Moosington will sail on by. He does have to go around the outside, but the difference in grip now really showing. Sweeps round the outside, and that is job done quite comprehensively. Final on-track battle, as far as I can make out, will be Pren versus Slicker for P16. They are on their final lap now. And currently Slicker doing enough to hold the position, but Pren very, very close. We will jump back just in time quickly to our leader. Jazzman likes to flag victory, not deterred by the weather change, makes it home, and that is P1 for Jazzman for the second week running after not getting a victory earlier in the season. Tinnis comes home second, but we will follow this battle to the line between Slicker and Pren. It remains within half a second. Will Pren send any kind of lunge? Slicker defends the inside sensibly. Pren goes for the cutback. They are almost side by side, but again, not quite enough for Pren. Slicker holding it on the apex. And they will come home in that order unless Pren can get the run out the final corner, and that is slightly rude from Slicker, just squeezing him out on the exit. But they do come home in that order. PS Vids came through for that third step on the podium. Adam P4, Scott about to come home in P5. We will have McQuiz home in P6 after sticking it out for longer on the dry tyres, making up plenty of time in the pit stop phases. Mr. Moosington, who was in the battle for P3 early on, but the second pit stop not working out for him. And then Joe Powell managing the race all the way on the dry tyres, I believe, losing a lot of time at the end, but managing to bring it home in P8 nonetheless. What a race that was. So much going on with the different strategies, the different tyres. I was expecting a nice simple one stop onto a fresh set of dries, but the weather threw all that up into the air. Despite that, the order not wildly changed in certain ways, but we did have some gainers and some losers through that pit stop phase. Notably McQuiz and Sharka Zulu gaining, Guido Christ, Mr. Moosington, several others pitting for a second stop to the wet tyres, which turned out not to be the way to go. I believe some drivers went for the wet tyres even before the rain started and just went through a pain of a couple of laps on those. And that is the end result. That also, unfortunately, will be the final stream of the season. I am not around next week for the season finale, so I appreciate everyone that's watched through these streams and watched these races back, either the drivers within it or any of you that haven't been involved, or Tier 2 drivers watching the action in Tier 1. And yeah, sadly there will not be a stream for the finale, which is a real shame, but overall it's been a fun season to see from a different perspective, and I hope you have enjoyed watching it yourselves and seeing the races in a slightly different way. But I will leave it there for tonight and for the season, as I say, and say goodnight. But thanks for watching.